All right, hello. Thanks for having me. So I just have to say a small little joke before we get started because my team was really excited that I was going to have walk-on music. So we didn't get it today, unfortunately, but they hacked into my email account and responded that I wanted to walk on to Katy Perry's Roar. So I'm really sad that that didn't happen, but we're going to have to pretend for them that it did. They were very proud. They're like, look at what we did. We finally got her. And that I'm a closeted Katy Perry fan. So really to get into the work that we've done at Empowerment Plan, really started off as a class project in college. So I was going to College for Creative Studies here in Detroit. It is wild to think that we've grown into what you see on the screen now. But really, it was around a product design class that is about designing to fill a need in the community. And this was in 2010, and a lot was happening in Detroit at that time. And of course, like any good design students, we didn't really know how to do design research yet, so we relied heavily on Google. And the first thing that we did was just Google Detroit needs and came up with a laundry list of things at the time. Most of them deep systemic issues, public transportation, public housing, education, all of these things that we felt like we couldn't tackle in a semester's class. And I remember what we did next was actually finally leave the computers behind and go talk to actual human beings. And when we did that, we heard stories from adults, from kids, everyone across the board about how in winter, as you're on your way to work or as you're on the way to school, you see this person that's outside in the worst weather and you want to do something to help, but you have no idea what's actually going to have an impact. And everyone felt that same internal conflict. Everyone, not just here in Detroit, but I've heard it in the years since across the globe. And it was amazing that that was the response, and that because no one knew what to do, they didn't do anything at all. And so what we did was then, all right, we're going to find a shelter and we're going to talk to people. So we Googled Detroit shelters and go to the first one that shows up in the search history because we're very talented researchers. And we go. And I remember this is the NSO Tsunami Center. It's a one-story windowless building. It was surrounded by barbed wire at the time. It was an intimidating place. And really, they only had about 150 chairs in this building. And you could sit there for 8 hours. Everything you owned must fit on your lap or underneath your chair, otherwise it was thrown out. And you get to sit there and stay, eat some food. Most people had spent years of their life sleeping in those chairs and couldn't sleep laying down. And basically stay there before the next group rotated in. Every street outreach group, every soup kitchen, all these organizations have street names, and that does not come up in Google. So when you pull up NSO and Tsunami Center, it's just a warming center, but on the streets, it's known as just hell. Didn't realize that, didn't come up in Google. And the reason that was because people were looking at this as like the last stop. This was, if you had been released from prison the night before, if you had nowhere else to go, you didn't have to be clean, you didn't have to be sober. This place was there for you, but it was also very rough and potentially dangerous. And so, of course, we show up with all of our design research crap, like sticky notes and Sharpies and horribly written questionnaires that were really going to get the heart of the problem. And we had read like some design research book at one point and thought sticky notes were the only way to design products and that process. So we show up, you go through 2 metal detectors and a pat down before you go into the building. And we get to meet with the manager and saying, hey, we're really excited, we're design students, we want to come in and we want to help people and we're going to come up with this new product thing. He's like, great. So you want to come in, you want to do some volunteer work, be my guest. Shift changes over at 8 p.m., bring whatever you want, you can talk to some people, sounds adorable. Next day, I show up again with my giant tote bag of crap, and I'm ready to go. I get through the 2 metal detectors, the pat down, there's people sitting in chairs, watching, I remember vividly, Cheers on a big television, and I'm waiting. It's 8 p.m., no one else shows up. None of the other classmates that I had gone to do like the scouting for this place with, waiting some more. Still no one shows. By this point, the night manager, whose name was Mr. Spratt, who had his arm in a sling from the fight from the night before, and he was wearing a linebacker jersey, was like, you ready? Like, are you gonna do this or what? It's like, okay, sure, I'll talk to some people. He pushes me out in front of the crowd, looks at me, says, good luck, you're gonna need it, clicks off the television and walks away. Then everyone just stands up and starts swearing at me. It takes him 10 minutes to calm everyone down, and I get it, I ruined the evening, I turned off Cheers, I understand. And basically, after everyone, sat down, all I could verbally vomit out was, I'm broke, I live with my grandparents, and I need your help to pass a class, which is super inspiring and really gets people wanting to engage with you on a deep level. The response was, a woman came up to me after, is like, you wanna help us turn our fucking television back on? I was like, got it? I'm gonna go melt into the wall over there, I'll see you later. I gave away all the disposable cameras I had. I got 2 back 6 months later, and that was how the empowerment plan began. It's a beautiful, warm story, but I think at the end of the day, that initial engagement of just, look, I need your help, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I wanna work with you on this. That's what started it. So I went every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night at 8 p.m. I rotated through every friend and family member I had, because they would only go once, and worked there and spent time there for about 6 months designing the coat. And the coat was really inspired by 2 things. It was inspired by a playground that had been turned into a makeshift home for someone 20 feet away from this shelter. It was across the street. It had been covered in tarps and clothes, and 2 people were living inside of it. And I remember going through, walking around the neighborhood one of the days that I was there, and I come back a week later, and it was burned to the ground in a turf war. It literally had been torn apart and melted and destroyed. And the 2 people survived the incident, only to pass away, I think about 6 to 9 months later, because they had been out in the elements for so long. And the biggest question that I had from that was like, one, why would you build yourself something that someone is trying to give you for free 20 feet away? It's not as if you don't have access. It's not as if you don't know it's there. It's 20 feet away from you. And you end up paying the ultimate price to do so. And really, it comes down to something we don't talk about when we talk about charity, which is pride, which is the need and want to take care of yourself, this dignity and respect. And the best example I've seen is the reason why we're all after wanting to take care of ourselves and after pride and dignity is how people treat others that are in the shelter. Have you ever seen a sandwich drive by show of hands? I'm really glad that no one raised their hand, that's great. When I was at NSO, this happened more than once, otherwise I wouldn't believe it could happen. So a group was charged with handing out food. So they packed the van full of sandwiches, and normally you get out, you set up a table, and you pass out food that way. You interact with people, but instead, this group was so afraid of the population of NSO that what they did was they slowly drove up to this building, slowed down to a crawl, rolled down all the windows, and started tossing sandwiches out the window at people. And in my mind, when you think about that, like, did they, at the end of their route, pat themselves on the back and say, good job? People were hungry, and we fed them. And when you look at giving back and social impact as a math equation, you end up with something like that, where you end up treating people, humans, like feral zoo animals. And that's why people want to go out and they want to create this home for themselves. And really, that was the hardest part of making my class project into an actual product. You know, I spent 80 hours making the first prototype. I had to learn how to sew from my mother, but it was all meant to give this opportunity. If you couldn't get into a shelter, that you weren't gonna lose limbs, that you weren't gonna lose feet or fingers to frostbite, that if there wasn't room for you, that you still have something. And the first couple prototypes were extremely rough. The first one weighed 23 pounds because it was using all recycled content. It had 20 different little broken needles inside of it because I was doing it on a home sewing machine. It was just a health hazard. And I kept on going back with prototype after prototype after prototype. I ended up with a street name that I still have to this day in that neighborhood, if you want to wander around and ask, which is the Crazy Coat Girl, or just the Coat Lady for short. And people would direct you to us at Empowerment Plan. But those coats, people were coming up to me and asking for the product. They were saying, so when are we going to get this jacket? When are we, like, strangers on the street were coming up to me like, I hear you're the coat lady. When are these coats going to happen? I was like, do you know how long it takes me to make one? It takes me 2 weeks to make one. There's like only 10 that I can make this year. And that response, though, was so powerful. I remember going back to the shelter, and as I was leaving with the most recent prototype, a woman started screaming at me, full on yelling, saying, I don't need a coat, I need a job. What you're doing is pointless. And in reality, the coat is just a Band-Aid for a systemic issue. And what really has the impact is hiring the people that would need it in the first place. And for me, it's personal. Both my parents and I grew up in a situation of homelessness and poverty and drug addiction, where we were constantly being evicted and moving around. And I know what it's like to be treated as if you're worthless or worthless by default because you're in a situation of homelessness and poverty, and how damaging that can be. And really, Empowerment Plan is an opportunity I wish that had been given to my own family. And in doing so, we started off with the coat. That is how we began, and that's what we're known for, but we're so much more than that. And I think that's what's the thing that gets me really excited, is that when people come to work at Empowerment Plan, they're only spending about 60% of their time on production. The rest is dedicated to GED classes, professionalism and leadership development, domestic violence support, mindfulness and meditation. We have a clinical therapist on staff, case managers. So you're getting paid to get your GED. You're getting paid to get your driver's license. Because they've shown, even in Chicago, for example, it takes one woman, one single woman to get out of poverty, going to over 70 different organizations. We have a very broken system that sends people all over the place. And instead of working as an ecosystem and understanding that we need to be a continuum of care, we ping pong people around, moving the responsibility from place to place to place, where, we'll take care of this part of it, but you need to go over there to address that. And people get lost. And understandably so, I can't even think of 72 different organizations that I would go to. And so what we look at ourselves really as an organization is we address the entire person when they walk in the door. We look at everything holistically. You can't maintain a job if you have no transportation, if you have no childcare, and if you don't have a roof over your head. So those are the three things that we focus the minute they get in the door. That's the first 90 days. And after that, they're with us for about 2 years before going on into other jobs. And I mean other jobs like home health care, welding, a lot in the actually mortgage banking field, which is really interesting as well. But to see that journey into middle skill, middle income takes time. So we immediately pay people, and they're getting paid to work on all of these things and spend time getting mental health support, buying a home, getting a car. Those are the really exciting things that we get to see. And because of that, over the last almost 7 years now, since this was a class project till now, we've actually distributed 40,000 codes now to, thanks. Across the entire US, all of Canada, and now 17 other countries. Disaster relief, refugee camps. We have been able to reach so many people around the world. At the same time, we've hired over 80 individuals, and each person has about 3.5 kids on average. And every single person we've ever hired moves out of the shelter within the first 4 to 6 weeks of working with us. And not a single person has ever, since we began, fallen back into homelessness once we've hired them. And that's the thing that we're the most proud of. But that just really goes to show you that these small ideas, I have no experience in entrepreneurship. I had no business background. I went to art school. I have no experience in sewing before I started this. But the smallest ideas in a crazy way can lead to something like this. And I wouldn't have expected this in a million years. So thank you for having me.